Omicron, Omicron, run. Okay, I think everybody's in from outside. So before we begin, Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Welcome Congressman Levin and his staff. We're just thrilled to have you all here. Just a couple of announcements I want to make. Those of you who are in Natan Fuchs's classes on Sundays, they'll be starting at 9:30 going forward. There's only one left in 2021, and then 2022. We'll continue with them again, but current events, 9:30 to 10, and then the history portion at 10. There are other classes that are going on hiatus for a couple of weeks, so please consult the newsletter. It's got everything, the latest, and if you lost your copy, you can find it, of course, on the website. I think that was about it for current announcements. We have to, because we were away for so long, we kind of got out of the habit of something that maybe we never got into the habit of it, I'll be honest with you, of wanting to welcome new members. And as a result, we got really backed up because we have quite a few. So in no particular order, actually that's not true, beginning with the most recent joins, I want to welcome, whether they're here or not, whether they're watching us possibly on YouTube, I want to welcome our new members, Pamela Aronson and Todd Paxton, Donna Francis, who's here, Rob Fuller, who I think is watching us in Devon, England, because he's one of our international members. Welcome, Rob. I will be there to see you in May, COVID willing. Daniel Brooks and Sarah Gold, Holly Hopkins and Jordan Steckloff. A number of people joined while we were in shutdown mode who we didn't have the opportunity to welcome. Mara Markowitz and Bob Oakes. Hannah Voigt, who grew up here and she joined now as an adult. Barb Douglas, Cindy and Bruce Hillenberg, hi, welcome. Lenore and Ron Kingston from Denver. Linda and Craig Ellison, I think Craig's here, and Helena and Richard Balin. So welcome, Bruchim Habaim, and Shabbat Shalom. Our readers tonight are Deborah Luria, Bobby Slade, Kathy Redner, Mark Luria, Mark Lipson, and Rabbi Miriam Jarris. And we begin, Arthur, with the first slide. We come together this Shabbat, each bringing with us a private world of hopes, of fears, of dreams. Some of us are burdened by anxieties and cares that all but crush our hope in the future, maybe many of us. Others have hearts filled with happiness, grateful for the joys of the past week, yet aware that even the most fortunate are vulnerable before the mystery of tomorrow. Every life is a unique blending of joy and sorrow, of fulfillment and frustration. Beneath our uniqueness, we are all bound together by our common humanity. All of us deeply yearn to know true freedom and peace. Each of us seeks the personal liberation of a mind that is not enslaved to conventional wisdom. Each of us strives, too, for the inner peace that comes with finding a harmony between our aspirations and our abilities. This is the Shabbat peace to which we aspire. I'd like to call on Melanie Goldberg, who will light our Shabbat candles. Oh, and Congressman Levin, thank you.
Baruch haor ba'olam, Baruch haor ba'adam, Baruch haor ba'shalom, ba'shalom, Baruch haor, Baruch haor,
Shabbat Shalom. Welcome, new members. May the doors of our community be wide enough to receive all who hunger for love, all who are lonely for friendship. May they welcome all who have cares to unburden, gratitude to experience, hopes to nurture. May the doors of our community be narrow enough to shut out pettiness and pride, envy and enmity. May their threshold be no stumbling block to young or unsure feet. May they be too high to admit complacency, selfishness, and harshness. May this congregation be, for all who enter, the doorway to a richer and more meaningful life.
There are times when we seek things for ourselves and measure failure by what we do not gain. When we gather on Shabbat, we seek not to acquire, but to share. There are times when we exploit nature as if it were a horn of plenty that can never be exhausted. When we gather on Shabbat, we emphasize our true place on this planet. There are times when we act as if we cared nothing for the rights of others. When we gather on Shabbat, we remind ourselves that justice is our duty and a better world our goal. Let us embrace this moment, a Shabbat gathering to unite, to learn, to better ourselves.
Shalom Aleichem, Ohavei HaShalom, Shomrei Shalom. Shalom Aleichem, Rodevei HaShalom, Shalom Aleichem. Bohem LeShalom, Ohavei HaShalom, Zeikem LeShalom. Miyom Zelayamim Habayim, Shalom Aleichem. Shalom Aleichem, Ohavei HaShalom, Shomrei Shalom. Shalom Aleichem, Rodefei HaShalom, Shalom Aleichem. Moavem LeShalom, Ohavei HaShalom, Zeitem LeShalom. Miyom Zelayamim Habayim, Shalom Aleichem.
Welcome. At one with our forebears, we affirm that righteousness and enlightenment shall be our torch. We shall teach these values diligently to our children all the days of our lives. We shall endeavor to live by these values in the comfort of our homes or on cold and windswept roads. Whether adversity bows our heads or fulfillment makes our spirits soar, our hands shall mete out justice to all, and our eyes shall be open to the light of truth. We shall emblazon our paths through life with this light as a beacon for all humankind.
When justice burns within us like a flaming fire, when love evokes willing sacrifice from us, when, to the last full measure of selfless devotion, we demonstrate our belief in the ultimate triumph of truth and righteousness, then goodness encompasses our lives and we can begin to change the world.
Time.
On February 14, 1990, as the first deep space probe Voyager, I left our planetary neighborhood for the fringes of the solar system. Engineers turned it around for one last look at its home planet, now 4 billion miles away. Carl Sagan wrote, "Look at that dot. That's here. That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you have ever heard of, every human being who ever was lived out their lives. The Earth is a very small stage in a vast cosmic arena. Think of the endless cruelties visited by the inhabitants of one corner of this pixel on the scarcely distinguishable inhabitants of some other corner, how frequent their misunderstandings, how eager they are to kill one another, how fervent their hatreds. Think of the rivers of blood spilled by all those generals and emperors so that, in glory and triumph, they could become the momentary masters of a fraction of a dot. Our posturing, our imagined self-importance, the delusion that we have some privileged position in the universe are challenged by this point of pale light. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. There is perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits than this distant image of our tiny world. To me, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another and to preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home we've ever known.
Shalom ba'olam, na'aseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol ha'olam, ve'imru shalom. Na'aseh shalom ba'olam, na'aseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol ha'olam, ve'imru shalom. Shalom aleinu ve'al ha'olam. Na'aseh shalom, na'aseh shalom. Shalom aleinu ve'al ha'olam. Na'aseh shalom, na'aseh shalom. Shalom aleinu ve'al ha'olam. Na'aseh shalom, na'aseh shalom. Shalom aleinu ve'al ha'olam. Na'aseh shalom.
In this community, where we find strength and common purpose, we turn our minds and hearts toward all those who need our love and support, those who are ill, those who suffer pain of the body or spirit, those who are lonely, and those who have been wronged. Tonight, we extend our well wishes to these members of our community and their loved ones, to Joe Gaydon, Karen Tremper-Harris, and Rabbi Peter Schweitzer. If there's someone whom you're thinking about, starting on this side of the room, yes, Deborah? Ned. Anybody here? Oh, yes, Jerry. Anybody in this section here, over here? Elaine? Did we miss anyone? May all who suffer know that they are not alone. May they be healed quickly. May they experience a refuah shlema, a complete recovery, the renewal of their bodies, and the renewal of their spirits.
Find the courage
Peace Corps. If I should die and leave you here a while, be not like others sore undone who keep long vigil by the silent dust. For my sake, turn again to life and smile, nerving thy heart and trembling hand to do something to comfort other hearts than mine. Complete these dear unfinished tasks of mine, and I, perchance, may therein comfort you.
Our thoughts turn to those who are no longer with us, our own loved ones, those whom our friends and neighbors have lost, the martyrs of our people whose graves are unmarked, and those every people and nation whose lives have been a blessing to humanity. As we remember them, we meditate on the meaning of love and loss, of life and death. We recall now our loved ones whom death has recently taken from us, those who died at this season in years past, and those whom we have taken into our hearts with our own. Tonight we observe the yahrzeits of these members of our congregational family and their loved ones. Rose Bowman, Lennon Gray Citron, Harry Cohen, Bernard Davis, Mildred Dreyfus, Louis DeZoden, Lieber Farber, Robert B. Jarendacey, Gerald Jerry Grotzky, Janie Gusson, Jean Hirsch, Philip Kaplan, Eva Lang, Harold Levine, Helen Lipson, Philip Lowe, Alvin Lubeck, Naomi Mandelbaum, Priscilla Molnar, Chaim Muroff, Dorothy Nesseth, Gertrude Oberstein, Irving Radner, Stephen Rice, Manya Roast, Joseph Rubin, Mark Shaberman, Nedwin Smokler, Frida Solomon, and Edward Warren. As we did earlier this time, if you're remembering someone who's no longer with us, whom you keep warm in memories, beginning on this side of the room. Anybody up in the balcony or here? Tom? Thank you. Sheila. Thank you. Diana? Sandy? Did we miss anyone at all? Yehi zichram livracha. May the memories of these wonderful people provide us with some measure of blessing as we face life now in their absence. If you can do so comfortably, please rise for our humanistic interpretation of Kaddish. Together, Nitzkadal v'nitzkadash beruach ha'adam. Let us dignify and ennoble all people in the spirit of our shared humanity. Let us acclaim the preciousness of life. Let us show gratitude for life by approaching it with reverence. Let us embrace the whole world, even as we wrestle with its parts. Let us, each in our own way, take up our share in serving the world and seeking truth. May our commitment to life help us to strengthen healing of spirit and peace of mind. May justice and peace permeate and comfort the house of Israel and all those who dwell on earth. And let us say, Ken Yehi, may it be so. Please be seated. Well, we're very fortunate tonight to welcome Congressman Levin. And I want to give a shout out to Eleanor Gamalski, too, who grew up here and who helped to arrange this and is a great leader in our community. For those of you who don't know her, she is moving on to other things, consulting with not-for-profits, and has done just so much for especially the social justice community. So I want to wish you well, Eleanor. So back to our guest speaker, who I know that you're all anxious to hear from. Representative Andy Levin, as you know, represents Michigan's 9th district in Congress. Happens to be my congressional district. We'll see what happens in a few weeks when they release those new maps. But I'm sure you all know that Congressman Levin is a native of Detroit. He holds a bachelor's degree from Williams College, an MPA from the University of Michigan, and a law degree from Harvard. Earlier in his career, he served as a labor organizer for the SEIU After working with Haitian immigrants, he co-founded an organization to assist immigrants, a cause that's dear to our heart, with challenges posed by the Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986. In Washington, Congressman Levin served as staff attorney to the Presidential Commission on the Future of Worker Management Relations, and also in the Secretary's Office of the United States Department of Labor. His work in labor continued from 1995 to 2006, when he served as Assistant Director of Organizing at the National AFL-CIO, working with many unions on a variety of efforts. His advocacy work continued in Michigan state government, where he created and ran the state's No Work Left Behind. He was also a force behind creating the Michigan Green Jobs Initiative, Green Jobs Report, and the Michigan Academy for Green Mobility Alliance. Subsequently, he founded Levin Energy Partners, LLC, to help shape state and national energy policy. Congressman Levin, importantly, has been a force in human rights advocacy for decades. This includes so many efforts, not least of which are his legal work for asylum seekers by investigating and reporting on human rights abuses in Haiti, in China, Tibet. He has long been active in the Jewish community. Until his election to Congress, he was the president of one of our sister congregations, Techia, and as chair of the steering committee of Detroit Jews for Justice, yay, an organization he helped to create to fight for racial and economic justice in Detroit. It is with this background that he has proposed the Two-State Solution Act, which he will be discussing tonight. Congressman Levin is married to his high school sweetheart, Mary Freeman, since 1991. They have 4 children, Kobe, Saul, Ben, and Molly, who live in Bloomfield Township, and I know you join me in welcoming to our BIMA, Representative Andy Levin. And sir, the one is for you.
Thank you.
Oh,
Thanks.
folks, when we have questions, this will be what we'll ask them.
Well, thank you so much, Rabbi Falik. It's great to be here. I first of all want to say how just comfortable I am to be here and how I have a lot of connections to your movement. My cousin Judy Gladstone, who grew up in Detroit, is a leader of Humanistic Judaism in Seattle. And my baby brother, Matt, has been active in Vermont, where he lives. So it's really, and of course, all the friends I have here. I met your president, Ned Greenberg, not from growing up here, but when, after living in Washington for 12 years after law school, and Mary and I moved, for me, home to Michigan, I met Ned through his good friend, my neighbor in Silver Spring, Betsy Keeler, and Harvey Meyerson. So there's just so many wonderful connections. It's great to be here. Also, I also just have to give a shout out to Eleanor Gomalski. This is her last day. She's running through the tape. She's working into the evening on her last day, 3 years of working with me to stand up my congressional career, and she's done such an amazing job. And my other amazing outreach staffer, Stephanie Sheena, is here. So Stephanie, we wave too, because she's staying on, and so thanks to both of them. All right, so once upon a time, I was a graduate student at the University of Michigan studying Asian languages and cultures. I was supposed to get a PhD and become a Buddhologist. I was studying Tibetan and learned to speak Tibetan, and I went to India. Part of my China human rights advocacy was I was in China during the Tiananmen massacre, actually, while I was a graduate student, trying to get into Tibet. I was in Chengdu, so that's another story. But anyway, while I was a graduate student, I helped organize an interfaith delegation to Israel and Palestine with some Jews, some Muslims, some Christians. It was led by the Episcopal Bishop of Michigan. And we went all over Israel and Palestine. In those days, we went to Gaza, and there was no such thing as Hamas. It was, 1990. This is a very different era. And I came home, and I wrote an op-ed in the Detroit Jewish News that it said, after 20, however many years of occupation of the territories, we have to join with so many Israelis I met who knew that the occupation was not healthy for Israel, it wasn't good for its security. We needed to stand up for the political and human rights of Palestinians and have a two-state solution. Now, you know, in 1990, that wasn't really kosher in this community, and especially with the powers that be, powers that were, powers that still are, many of them. And so, but still, it was something I really believed. And then many years later, after all that stuff that Rabbi talked about, I went to Congress. I immediately sought and got a seat on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Right now, I'm the vice chair of the Asia Subcommittee. I'm also on the Western Hemisphere Subcommittee. Still active in Haiti. I founded a Haiti caucus with three amazing, I sought out co-chairs who represent some of the biggest Haitian American communities. Val Demings in Florida, Yvette Clark in New York City, and Ayanna Presley in Boston and Cambridge. And the four of us are still very active in Haitian human rights. But anyway, I went on a trip before COVID, just 2 years ago, in November of 2019, to Israel and Palestine. And to be honest with you, I went skeptical. Could a two-state solution still be possible? 30 years after I wrote that op-ed, with all the more settlements and all the strife and so forth. And we went all over, and we had so many meetings with Israelis and Palestinians, and looked at, you know, visited and saw some of the difficult places. And I came back convinced that yes, a two-state solution is absolutely still possible. Based on 1967 borders with land swaps of equal size and equal value, deal with Jerusalem in some way that honors the rights of both people. And I felt like it was possible. And so then, more recently, we had the latest horrible war in Gaza. And, you know, I found it very interesting that, and positive really, that the outcry from the world that this needed to stop happened so much more quickly. Still, it was horrible. Over 200 people died. But in 2014, the last Gaza war, 10 times as many people died. And now today, everybody with their cell phones and their cameras and, you know, evidence of the moment of what's happening, some of us started calling for a ceasefire immediately. And in any event, it happened. But so after that, then people say, well, maybe we can have a little reconstruction of Gaza or some humanitarian assistance, and I'm for all of that. But I said, no, it's not enough. And I said to some of the organizations who work with us, J Street and Americans for Peace Now, that I was going to author a bill that said America needs to pick up its role again of both being Israel's best friend and guarantor and the necessary party to bring Israelis and Palestinians together to actually achieve a two-state solution. In this super difficult time, when you have every excuse for saying it's not possible, we have to organize. You know, in 1964 and 1965, when we passed the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, people like me in Congress didn't just write those laws that year. They wrote them in 1957, in 1958, in 1959, and people organized and worked. And then something happens in history. History isn't just some kind of straight line, right? It's disjunctive. People die, crises happen, you don't know what's going to happen. And if you're not ready at that moment when change is possible, it's not going to happen in a good way. So here's what we did essentially was figure out what are all the really concrete steps that the American government should take to prevent a two-state solution from slipping out of view altogether, forever, and to actually move in that direction. Because I don't know about you all, but to me, much differently than in 1990, now a two-state solution, everybody says they're for a two-state solution. And they just mouth the words. And it's just like after the latest mass shooting, people say about their thoughts and prayers are with you. And you know what? I don't want to hear about how people's thoughts and prayers are with Oxford. People with power, if they're not going to do something to end gun violence and to pass sensible gun reform. And to me, it's the same thing with the two-state solution. Don't tell me you're for a two-state solution, and then when people talk about annexing parts of the West Bank, all of it, or putting settlements in Area E1, which is the narrow waist of the West Bank, which would cut off a possibility of a contiguous little tiny Palestinian state. And you don't say anything about that. Well, you're not really for a two-state solution. You're part of the problem. So here's what's in the bill. First of all, it undoes a lot of the bad stuff that the previous president did, including he wiped out the distinction between Israel and the territories. No, you can't say something's made in Israel if it's from the occupied territories. You can say it's from the occupied territories if you want, but we have to maintain those distinctions, and it does some other things like that. It says that we have to take active efforts to build up democracy and the rule of law and civil society in Palestine. Right now, the government of the PA has if you go sit down with a leading pollster in Ramallah, as we did, they will tell you in really great detail of boring 60 slides of a PowerPoint, just, but really, really high quality, that the Palestinian people have no confidence in the PA, that it has no legitimacy. So we have to work to build up democracy and human rights in Palestine. The bill would make major efforts there. We have to try to encourage diplomacy between ourselves and Palestine and Israel, and between Israelis and Palestinians on many levels. So, you may never have heard of the Taylor Force Act, but it's the bill, it's the law that we have that prevents us from doing things with the Palestinians as long as they have their pay-to-slay policy, right? So if someone goes and straps a suicide bomb on and goes and blows themselves up to kill Israelis, then that family gets extra money or something. So this bill encourages the Palestinians to come into compliance with Taylor Force Act and stop doing that, and said, we want to reopen a Palestinian diplomatic mission in Washington, and we will do that if you please, stop doing this thing that's very harmful. The bill encourages people-to-people diplomacy. Nita Lowey, before she retired, we passed a bill in her honor, but it wasn't really funded, and the Two-State Solution Act would breathe life into that, provide funding, so students and businesses could work together more in Israel and Palestine. The bill affirms our aid to Israel. Doesn't say we should cut it by 1 penny. It doesn't condition our aid to Israel. In other words, saying, if you have to do this, we'll take this away. But it says that our aid to Israel can only be used for Israel's legitimate security interests. It cannot be used to extend the occupation, to build more settlements, to blow up people's houses, to evict people from their houses. And that we actually have to step up to the plate and say, if you're going to use American taxpayer dollars, you have to use it for what we're giving it to you for, not for extending the occupation or certainly for de facto or de jure annexation of the territories. So the bill has so far just over 40 co-sponsors, including, I think there's 7 of us Jewish members who have, 6 others plus me are co-sponsors. Senior members of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, the Intelligence Committee, Armed Services Committee, senior members of Democratic leadership altogether. There's no Republicans in sight of embracing this. And I think that speaks to the fact that the Republicans are completely off the planet of democracy, But on this issue, it's really, as Jews, it's really important that Israel not be a partisan football, and that support for Israel and for Israel and Palestinian rights and Palestinian human rights and political rights together, and a two-state solution. We want it to be a bipartisan thing. Well, right now, the Republican Party has no interest. They want to turn Israel into a partisan issue, which is disastrous for Israel, by the way. and bash Democrats. It's false. Democrats overwhelmingly support Israel. But what we're doing with this bill, really, is creating a new center of gravity. And we're saying that we are going to work hard to create a two-state solution. And it's the only way to have a democratic homeland for the Jewish people. It's the only way is to have a homeland for the Palestinian people next door. And in doing this, I have to deal with all sides, all comers. And I just want to say to you that some people who favor a one-state solution, a binational state where Jews and Palestinians live together, I do, and it's a democracy, I do not attack them. I don't think it's realistic. I don't think it's possible. I'll admit, personally, as a Jew, I kind of want a homeland for the Jewish people. I feel so ready to live with Palestinians in brother and sisterhood and love of each other. But the idea of Jews being a minority in, a Palestine that would be a homeland for Jews and Palestinians, let's start with a homeland for the Jews and a homeland for the Palestinians and see where we get. Maybe one day we'll be such a tight federation and so integrated economically and everything, but that feels a long way off to me, and I think it's really important. But what I'm trying to say to you is, I don't say it's anti-Semitic to criticize Israel, even harshly. When Human Rights Watch and B'Tselem say that the way Israel manages the West Bank is illegally an apartheid situation, I don't say that myself, but that is not an anti-Semitic thing to say. It's a very serious critique of a situation that is unacceptable in human rights terms. And at the same time, obviously, to the right, people are super critical of any criticism of Israel. But to me, we as Jews have to stand up and fight for our values and for the soul of the Jewish people. And, this is the way I look at it. In the Torah, 36 times it mentions that you should love the stranger or love your neighbor as yourself in one way or another. It's the most of any commandment, the most by far. And so that's fine. We come to shul and we say, we have wonderful prayers and we talk about these things. And it matters if you love the person who's on the street or a person who you don't know is a stranger in that sense, or a person who's of a different religion or ethnicity than you. But I don't think it's enough. And I think as Jews, we have to say, well, who's the really hard neighbor? Who's the hardest stranger? And to me, that question answers itself. It's the Palestinians. And if we really want to honor the social justice core of our faith, we have to step up, and after 54 years of occupation, we have to say, it's too long. There's no future of security for Israel in endless occupation, and we have to do whatever it takes to push the Israelis and Palestinians into each other's arms. My bill doesn't say what the final and the boundaries are. It doesn't say the details of Jerusalem. That's for the parties to decide. But this bill says we have to get about the business of making this happen. And shame on us if we don't. So I'm super happy to discuss with you. It's one of my passion projects in Congress. And it's a real honor to be able to talk to you about it a little bit tonight. Thanks very much.
I'll call on you, but then I'd like you to come to the microphone, okay? But I'll be open to mine, you can ask the first question. Hold on.
Good.
Is it working? Okay. I have to.
Is the mic on?
I'm sorry.
I don't hear.
I have two questions. One from Barbara Harvey, who's not here, but she's watching, I guess, through.
Can you all hear? I don't think it's working.
I don't know if it's. Okay. Sorry. Can you hear me better now? Okay, G, okay. Okay. So I said I have two questions. One from Barbara Harvey, I'm asking her behalf. She's not here, she's watching. And one from me. But in courtesy, I'll ask Barbara's question first. So she says the two-state solution was for many decades a resolution sought by Palestinians. But though I know many Palestinians, including many refugees, all of whom want nothing more than to return home, they have with sorrow given up their hope for such a resolution. This is because they can clearly see that a viable Palestinian state is no longer viable. Once farmlands and olive orchards have been paved to become Israeli cities, euphemistically called settlements, those farms no longer exist, that land no longer be farmed. Once cities have been... Slow down. What? Slow down.
They want you to slow down.
Okay.
They're not in a hurry.
What?
It's Shabbat. We're relaxed.
Okay, so, sorry, I've lost. Once cities have been built, complete with schools, theaters, all the earmarks of our own cities, they cannot be dismantled. They are there to stay. The Palestinians I know now want a single democratic state, by the way, including myself, with equality for all, because they know that it is too late to go back to 1967, no less 48. Please respond. This is from Barbara.
Okay. And what about you?
Oh, mine, okay.
I know Barbara, and I'll remember her question.
I'm sorry, give me 1 second. Come on. Sorry, give me 1 second here.
Oh, that's okay.
Sorry about that. Okay, this is my son. So my name is Nabil Abdul Seder. I'm originally from Lebanon. I want to start by thanking you for taking courageous steps and for your great service. I've met you a couple of times. I'm one of your supporters. I donate politically, I support politically, and I donate financially also, just so you know. So do many of my friends and colleagues, and I have many. I want to say one thing. There is so much you said, Andy, that I wish I had an hour to talk about, but I know I don't. So I want to start by saying this. You talk about the United States brokering or working with in the Palestinian. There's absolutely zero trust from the Arab world with the American administrations, one after the other. We're putting the blame on Trump, but Trump was just the one that made it a little bit worse. But it's been terrible for 60, 70 years. No advancements. Settlements have grew since Oslo by fourfold since Oslo. And it started under the labor. Yesterday, yesterday settler from illegal outpost was killed, and the Israeli government was quickly sprinted into action, assigning 2 or 3 units additional boost to support the, to go support the whatever settlement, right? The net price from the State Department condemned strongly the killing of the Israeli. But in the last month, about 35 Palestinians were killed, innocent Palestinians. No condemnation from the State Department. No action on the Israeli department. For some of you guys that might not have seen it, there was a Palestinian that was injured on the floor 2 days ago. They shot him 5 times in the back while he was on the floor dying. They shot him 5 times, and Gantz supported it. So I'm sorry if I'm getting emotional. Question is, I have a very simple question, and please, this question, I hope you can take it to Ned Price or to Blinken. The question is, where do Palestinians go for justice? And not how you achieve justice for the Palestinians. Because the second question is always the two-state solution. My question is very simple. Where do the Palestinians go for justice? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, so it's good to see you. Let's see. So Barbara Harvey is a supporter of a one-state solution, and so are you. So as I said, I respect that. And let's just, as Jews, let's just admit that that is not really, even talking respectfully with people who want one democratic state where Jews and Palestinians live together is not something that happens in our community. So the fact that if we're doing it right now, it's a tribute to the Congregation for Humanistic Judaism. I think that and Barbara, a lot of what she's talking about are people who've lost their houses and land inside Israel. And the Nakba, or what happened in 1948, was unjust in many ways. And Israelis have, begun to admit this. But I personally, if you look at all the world and all the injustice in the world, sort of trying to go backwards and go to who was the first person who was right or wrong. And it doesn't, I don't think it really works. So to me, I think that, you know, and obviously you get into biblical claims and, you know, all this kind of, you do. So, and, you know, the people who, you know, a lot of Jews believe in greater Israel, and they call the territories Judea and Samaria, which are real names, and they talk about stories of when this person went in this area and that area, of what could, you know, was the only thing there could be to be a Palestinian state, for a two-state solution idea. So I think that basically there are human rights violations in the occupation every single day. As you know, when I was on my trip, I was in the South Hebron Hills. This is in November of 2019. And we were going to a village of Susia in what's called Area C, which is the part that's not administered by the PA. It's Palestinian Authority. It's administered by the IDF, or Kogat, the civilian part of the IDF. And this village, a little Palestinian village, had been sort of demolished and moved multiple times because, and they cannot get building permits to do anything. And they have no running water at all. It's a little tiny village. And we went there, about several members of Congress and other board members of J Street and so forth. And we were going to visit with people in the village and have a meal with them and hear their story, which we did. But on the way in, there was the water utility was trenching, you know, with a trenching big machine through the, not right where the people live, but, you know, through the property of the village. And were they trenching to bring water to those people? No. If you looked up on the hill, the highest spot, there was in the sun, you know, glinting a metal roof of like a trailer. And, you know, settlers had put a trailer on the high spot, and there was an illegal settlement there. And even though this settlement was illegal under Israeli law, the Israeli water utility was taking a water line to that trailer so they could have hot and cold running water like everybody else, right? Everybody has that in their house. Well, the Palestinians, if they could have a well where they could get water for their livestock and to fill buckets so they could go back to their houses and take a bath, that's like their goal. They have to buy water and bring it there. So I tweeted something about this, and it was as if the sky had fallen. Anyway, a lot of Jewish people were just horrified that I said this. And Kogat, the civilian arm, part of the Israeli Defense Forces, tweeted that I was lying, that water was going to Palestinians. And for a year and a half, I had a correspondence with Kogat, which ended up in a dry well, just like no water, just like it was just false. They were lying. The water wasn't going to any Palestinians. It was just going to those illegal settlers. So I have no, Nabil, I don't, I'm like the farthest out there Jew you got in Congress who's fighting to end the occupation. No, I'm serious. It's fighting to end the occupation, really, of the members of Congress there are. And it's a difficult place to be, and it's inadequate to you. I know that, and I'm sorry about that. But my honest feeling is that I want to try for a two-state solution, and I still think it's possible. And I want to work with you to get justice for the Palestinian people after all these years. And I feel like if you and I can work together, Barbara Harvey and other people, we could get it done. But we all have to work together. Yes, who's next? Yeah, well, I think I don't think there is justice for the Palestinian people today. There's not justice in Israeli courts and let me just say that I think one of the things that was very troubling for people, I don't know, many of you may have traveled to Israel and some of you to territories, but you know, the violence in Israeli cities between, you know, Palestinian, you know, Arab Israeli citizens and Jewish citizens was very troubling during the war in Gaza recently. So I'm very, very concerned about it. All right, go ahead.
Yeah.
Go right to the mic because I think it's a...
I assume you're familiar with Meron Ben-Benisti, who died a year ago. And he was one of the authors of the two-state solutions under Rabin.
Okay.
And he died in 2020, but by the beginning of the 21st century, he gave up on the two-state solution because with all those growing settlements, it's becoming more and more impossible. Now, what I want to ask you is, let's assume that you come to a point where you give up. What's your plan B if there is no two-state solution?
Well, so what I would say is that in terms of what's really possible, so there are a lot of settlements very close to the Green Line, and they are very populous. And then there are settlements sprinkled throughout the West Bank, farther afield. And I think what has to happen is that there just have to be land swaps where some of the ones very close in would be incorporated into the Israeli side, and Israel would have to give land of equal quality and size to the Palestinian side. And you know, for example, one of the best meetings we had was with two women. Let's say they're in their 70s or late 70s, I think. One is the highest woman general or whatever ever in the Israeli armed forces. The Palestinian woman wasn't part of the military. The two of them had been part of every negotiation. And they sat with us and they said, you know, men, you know, if it wasn't for men, and you know, aren't they probably right? You know, men and their egos and their, you know, macho BS. So they sat with us though, sir, and they told us exactly what they said. We know what's possible. We could just do it today. And they ticked off all the things that, you know, would have to happen quite in detail. And, you know, they're complete masters of the material. And so I personally do think it's still possible. And I think that you have to have a moral imagination to think that we can break out of long stalemates and, you know, bring about real change. And I understand if people have given up on it. Look, a lot of young Jews, let's be honest, if you're not aware, you know, a lot of young Jewish people have given up on the two-state. It's more than twice as old as them. My own kids, I've got, you know, many young relatives who, you know, don't support a two-state solution. I also I worry that they're disconnected from their own, you know, a lot of the history of our people, the immigration experience, you know, the Holocaust, what's happened over and over, the pogroms, all the problems, you know, that Jews have had over the centuries. And so anyway, you know, I don't have a plan B, but I tell you, if I came to think it was impossible to have a two-state solution, then it would certainly have to be some kind of a one state that was, you know, democratic state for both peoples. Now, I got to say something so I'm a Reconstructionist, right? I'm a religion major, and I don't want to get into how into religions I am, but including Judaism. But one of the things I love about Reconstructionism is our founder of our denomination, Mordecai Kaplan, was not trying to found a new form of Judaism. He was arguably the preeminent intellectual presence in JTS, the Jewish Theological Seminary, the conservative rabbi training school in Manhattan in the 30s and 40s and, you know, in the 20th century. He wrote a lot of books, and he came up with a lot of ideas. Basically, he was like a huge success at about changing Judaism and kind of not such a great success in founding a new denomination because we're kind of tiny. But his ideas took over, like the idea of a Jewish community center was his idea. His idea was, one of his big ideas was Judaism as a civilization. We've got theater, we've got languages, we've got literature, we've got food, right? We're not just a religion, we're a people. And the reason I mention that is, that's what I think about Israel. You know, I think the Jewish people, you know, can have a homeland, and the Palestinian people certainly deserve a homeland too, and that we just have to figure it out. But if it couldn't happen as two states, I guess it would have to be one state living together. And I haven't gotten to that point myself. Who else? Yeah, or I don't know, I'm not calling it.
Hi, well, I'm a friend of Nabil and a friend of Barbara Harvey. I love them both, but I want to ask about something else because to me, the two-state solution and the one-state solution are equal fantasies. So let me ask you about something else, okay?
Do you have a non-fantasy or just your... in the thing about like people have had a bad week, you're
the whole
like that's like just
the whole constellation of forces has to change, okay?
Okay.
Including the $5 billion that the U.S. gives to Israel. But I want to ask you about specific things relating to right now and what the American government can do.
okay.
Number one, Israel has just, with absolutely no factual basis whatsoever, declared that 6 major human rights organizations, Palestinian human rights organizations, designated them as terrorists. Unless the United States repudiates that, all of their capacity to get funding, that is, no banks will handle their funding and so forth. So the question is, what will the Biden administration, I know what the Trump would do, okay? What will the Biden administration that claims to be supporters of, you know, human rights and democracy and all that stuff do about it? Secondly, I know that even opponents of BDS like Ron Wyden and Adam Schiff are outraged by what the NSO group has done. That's this Israeli group that provides spyware
the business
software to the worst governments in the entire world.
Yeah.
And it's not just NSO. There are other Israeli operations that do the same kind of thing. So what will the American government and the Biden administration actually do about these specific things?
Well, good questions. So I don't know what the Biden administration will do, but let me say just a few words about the Biden administration, then a few words about those things. So I was a very active supporter of Elizabeth Warren. I went to New Hampshire, Iowa, Nevada, California. I guess I wasn't much help. Maybe she lost because of me. But she's a real, friend, and just I think she's fantastic. But anyway, Joe Biden, obviously won, and so I was like, okay, fine, fine. I'm good with that. And I campaigned really hard for Joe Biden. And on Israel and Palestine, I said, well, look at this. Here's this guy who's been around. He's an old guy. He's been around forever. He's been on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee for so long. He really knows about this stuff. He has more foreign policy chops than any president in a long time. Now, I haven't always agreed with what he, decisions, but still, I thought, look, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, I figure what he should do is say, look, I've got one term, maybe two, you never know, right? So for sure, I've got one term. And the last year is an election year, right? So really, I've got 3 years to work on this. So I'm going to say to the Israelis and Palestinians, I want to negotiate super intensely for a year and see if we can get where we can get. And then if we haven't gotten there, I'm going to start pressuring both of y'all to that you're really going to have to come together. But you wouldn't have to say how exactly. And, American presidents from Eisenhower, George H.W. Bush, Carter, George W. Bush, many presidents have used, money, elbow grease, whatever, to pressure Palestinians and Israelis, certainly, withholding funds and doing all different things. Well, gee whiz, he didn't do it at all. And they backburnered the whole issue. And I don't see a lot of focus on it. Now, in terms of the human rights groups, the Defense Minister Benny Gantz took the lead on this and said that these groups are tied to terrorist organizations. And I thought, wow, remember, my bill is about building up those very groups. It's one of the things it's about. Supporting them, giving them more funds, working with them to shine a light on what's happening. They criticize, just in case anybody doesn't know, they document the violations of Palestinian rights in the occupation by the IDF and so forth very extensively. They also document violations of human rights by Hamas and the PA in the territories they control. And so I personally have spoken up about this, and I will continue to. But as to what the Biden administration will do, I cannot tell you because I don't control them. But I think a number of us in Congress are working hard to try to persuade them to do something, because it's really counterproductive to undermine the organizations in Palestine that are fighting for human rights and democracy there, and yes, maybe and are documenting the violations of Palestinian rights from the Israeli Defense Forces and so forth. In terms so what can I say about this? But what's that company's called NSO? Is that what it is? And their product is called Pegasus, right? Okay. Well, let's talk about a happy thing that at least happened recently. Is that we got Danny Fenster out of prison in Burma and he's home. Isn't that, I'm so happy about that. So let's just say that I knew about Pegasus before it hit the news because of Danny's situation. So I really don't like that, what's done with that. Is there a worse government than the coup regime in Burma? Right? And that they would have access to something like this? It's horrifying. So I am with you about the need to, and I think there's the Biden administration does seem like they might do something about this. Pegasus is a program that lets someone get into, supposedly not in America, but let's say you lived in Belgium, or you lived in Durban, South Africa, or you lived in Bangkok or wherever around the world. They can get into your iPhone, control it without you knowing it, see all your pictures, all your voicemails, move things around, take things out, put things in, frame you by putting files in your phone, anything they want. And as the gentleman said, this is being used by a lot of governments that really are just using it to oppress their people. So I am 100% in agreement with you. And again, I'm just going to encourage the Biden administration to take a strong stand on it. I think there's a greater chance they'll do something about that.
Thank you for bringing up the topic. It's worthy of deep thought, and as you said.
You just got to you got to make love to the mic. I know it's okay. COVID and it's kind of awkward, and you don't really want to put hand sanitizer on your lips. But
no. Okay. Thank you for bringing up the topic. It's important and needs to be considered. It's been discussed for a long time, and many of these positions of various people have hardened in place. And I'm not an expert on this at all, but it seems to me that the only new factor that has come into this game recently is the fact that the present government of Israel is, if I'm not mistaken, depending in part on Arab support. And if that's the case, suppose you moved on that meshes, that the Arabs would gain political support within Israel, and then people would might listen. But without power, without political power, nobody listens. That's my point.
Well, so that's a very interesting thing. So the current government of Israel is a coalition of just a bare majority of the Knesset, the Israeli parliament. It is an everything but the kitchen sink coalition. It's unprecedented in Israel's history. It includes everything from some sort of progressive groups to mostly the middle, to some very right-wing groups, and then one Arab list group. And how many members do they represent? Is it 3? I was going to say 6 maybe. But what's one thing that's really interesting is that Yair Lapid, who represents the biggest group, and it's a centrist group as they call it, allowed Naftali Bennett, who represents only 6 people, to be the prime minister first. He had to do that, I mean, they say, to get the coalition to work. Well, let's be clear. Naftali Bennett is an absolute opponent of a two-state solution and of Palestinian rights at all, really, and political or human rights. And so people raise, the settler violence problem is a huge problem right now. It has been for a long time, but it is really, and the numbers, I think you said it, Nabil, 35, these exact numbers in my briefing book as I came here. What you said. 1 settler killed recently and 35 Palestinians. And these settlers are, they go on like vigilante kind of rampages, and they're not held accountable. So it's a huge problem. Naftali Bennett says that's nothing. It's not a problem at all. So there is a very fragile coalition, and the prime minister today he's not worse than Bibi Netanyahu because he doesn't have any. I mean, Bibi Netanyahu was sort of like a powerful ethno-nationalist like Trump and Bolsonaro, and I mean, there's a lot of them around the world right now, and it's a big problem. But Naftali Bennett, since he represents so few, and he doesn't have that power, and I hope that we can kind of get beyond him. But anyway, I do think it's very significant that Arabs have joined, the citizens of Israel have joined the government. It's controversial in the Palestinian world, to be sure, and but I think it could be a factor in how things play out in the future. Absolutely, it's a very important thing to raise.
One question, sir.
My name is Ray Mccarris. I'm another non-Jewish member of Jewish Voice for Peace.
So you got to get right up to the mic.
Can you hear me? No?
Right into the mic.
Okay. I said,
By the way, this is the most universal thing I find among people. They do not like to get really close to mics, even in non-COVID times. It's universal. Or it's like this, or it's like this. So you got to really, to Ray.
I'll start again. My name is Ray Mccarris. I'm another non-Jewish member of Jewish Voice for Peace. And my question to you is, when I heard that Israel was receiving another $1 billion to rearm so that they could beat up on the Gaza again, I thought that was just incredibly sad. What is your opinion of that?
So in case you didn't hear, the question was, he thought it was really sad that Israel was getting another $1 billion to rearm and beat up on Gaza again, and that's really sad. What's my opinion of it? So while Israel, during the recent Gaza war, sent planes and missiles, or whatever, into Gaza, the Hamas and other parties in Gaza sent at least 4,500 rockets or missiles into Israel, and completely aimed with would hit any civilian anywhere without any precision. And it's an absolute war crime. And it's a horrifying thing that Hamas does that. And it's unacceptable. And what we gave Israel money for was one precise thing called Iron Dome. And Iron Dome is an astounding technology that shoots down those rockets from Gaza in midair and prevents them from killing people. That's what it's for. That particular money was not for offensive weapons at all. It was to replenish Iron Dome. That's the answer. And I voted against the National Defense Authorization Act recently. I'm one of a small number of members of Congress who stand up and say, and there's an irony to it, because a lot of times I get like bills that I write and they make it all the way through Congress and signed by the president because they're in the NDAA, because that's something that's passed every year. For example, I have had stuff to reduce PFAS contamination, and I've had there's a law of our land that the U.S. can't give money to recreate a military in Haiti that I wrote. But anyway, I get that stuff in there, and then I still vote against the overall bill, because we spend too darn much money on the military and not enough on human needs. And so that's my feeling. But I'll just, in conclusion, I occupy a really uncomfortable place, and I'm not going to leave it. I don't know if I can win re-election, whatever this redistricting has. But I am a Jewish member of Congress who's going to stand up for Israel's existence and stand up for full political and human rights of Palestinians. I think it's the only way forward, and I think it's the only Jewish thing to do. Thank you.
Having been involved in this for a few decades now, I'm just just a year maybe younger than you, I can tell you this is a very brave position in Congress, and I think that Congressman Levin deserves our appreciation for finding this place on the political map. So again, thank you. We're going to conclude now with Peace Be With You. Evzer? Peace be with you wherever you go. Peace be with you whatever you do. Peace be with you till we meet again. Peace be with you, my friend. Love me with you wherever you go. Love me with you whatever you do. Love me with you till we meet again. Love me with you, my friend. Joy be with you wherever you go. Joy be with you whatever you do. Joy be with you till we meet again. Joy be with you, my friend. Shalom Aleichem, shalom, shalom. Shalom Aleichem, shalom, shalom. Shalom Aleichem, shalom, shalom. Shalom Aleichem, shalom. Thank you, Ezra. Thank you, all of you. Join us for the Oneg if you wish. Shabbat Shalom.